Hello and welcome back to NHB Retro. In this episode, we're going to be taking a look at this lovely Macintosh Plus here that I was able to sort of rejuvenate, get back up and running. It's been a very long ongoing project for me. Had a lot of sort of life stuff going on at the same time, and so this ended up taking forever. I have to admit I'm not the most knowledgeable about Macs, certainly not about these classic Macs, so I definitely stumbled a bit along the way. But in the end, it was a really fun project. One of the things that kind of tripped me up for a while was obviously when you're working inside of a Macintosh like this, there's a CRT in there. You want to be extremely careful about the high voltage potential. Even when it's unplugged, turned off, etc., it can still shock you and kill you. So I was extra cautious in my approach to that. But yeah, I was basically able to get it all up and running. It has a few quirks still. You'll see in the video that I had some issues with this drive here. I actually ended up swapping out to a completely different drive that I had that works much nicer than the one that is in the video. But yeah, basically, very fun project. And let's just jump right in and you can follow along as I figure things out. Okay, we've got the disk drive here out of the computer. Nothing complicated or unusual about that. You literally just take out the screws and pull the drive out of the chassis. Now the drive, when I booted it up, when I tried to boot the computer, it made a whirring and a clicking sound. These drives have this auto eject motor here, and it's pretty much the absolutely most common point of failure on these drives. So what I know has happened is there's a little gear in here that has crumbled over time. It's made out of a plastic that didn't age well. And luckily there's people out on the internet that will print replacements of those for you. And I have a few here that I have purchased from these folks. There's many of them that out there that will do it for you if you have your own 3D printer. This one looks like some nice resin print. Yeah, so let's go ahead and get that the broken one out of here. Let's see what it looks like. And this little eject drive is just held on here by these two screws. And there's a little connector here, which I have already pulled loose. You want to be very careful with these, obviously. Lots of little pieces. So this just comes right off. And then you can see, set this over here. Now you can see the back of it here. We've got some gearing and a little plate. Let's get this off. Lots of, well, not lots, but little teeny screws to keep track of and not strip. Sorry for the hands in the way. Okay, so now we have the little plate removed, or rather the screws removed. Now the plate's off. And let's see if we can get it to focus here. This little gear is the one that breaks. Let me see. Oh, yeah, you can already see, of course, that some of those teeth have been snapped off. So, yeah, I think I just need to very carefully. Well, first I'm going to clean it a little bit. But yeah, I just need to very carefully pull this gear out, then I can replace that gear. Let me, just going to explore that a little bit off camera first. Okay, here's a little closer up scene of that drive eject system. And here you can see that this is the gear that has broken. You can see it pretty clearly here. We just need to get that out of there, so we just need to carefully remove this gear. which I realize I'm obscuring in a big way. Okay, so now we can even see better how just destroyed that little gear is. Let's see if we can just get this out of here. These are just held in by that plate, so once they're out, they just come right out. Okay, and now let's get one of these replacement gears in there. First, let's drop a bunch of these replacement gears on the floor. That's pretty key. Okay, so here we go. Replacement gear. Should just pretty much slide right on there. Get the teeth lined up well. Make sure they mesh. And they do. And it's right down in there. Okay. Whoops, sorry for that. And then this gear just goes right back on the top. Make sure everything's meshing. Let's see here. Does this go? Huh. All right, and there we go. So we've got the motor assembly reinstalled on the drive. I went ahead and oiled a few of the contact points on this drive. I cleaned the heads, all very normal stuff. Yeah, let's get this put back into the computer and see if this part works now. All right, here we have the Macintosh Plus back on the bench. This project got a little bit more complicated than I had expected at some point. I kind of thought I was just going to, the worst I thought I was going to have to do is some recapping on the board. But it turns out the disk drive was not in good shape in this computer. In fact, you'll notice there's a number of disk drives on the bench here. This is the original disk drive. And I'm not sure, it has various mechanical issues. I mean, it's an old mechanical piece of equipment, so naturally they don't tend to age that well. But this one in particular, I'm not sure how well you're going to be able to see this, but if I release the head, you notice there's quite a bit of gap between the top head and the bottom head. I think this top, this arm that the top read write head rides on, I think it got bent a little bit, and that's probably all that is really wrong with that portion of it. However, the mechanics of it also seem like they have some issues. So I decided I would just replace that drive. So here's the second drive that I got. This one also had a broken gear, just like the first one that I showed replacing. Super common. I anticipate any of these drives that doesn't have that yet, I will probably replace the gear anyway, just because that's bound to happen. Anyway, this drive and the drive that I currently have attached to the Mac do exactly the same thing, and I'll show you what that is. So I've got the Mac drive sort of propped up. It's not shorting or anything, and otherwise the computer is just sitting open to the case here. And I'll cycle the power, and I'll show you what goes on. So of course you can probably hear that very loudly. The disk drive is just constantly trying to eject. The Macintosh does turn on though, and it's looking for a disk. Mouse seems to work. And both of like I said, both of my other two drives that will work here do that. Let's just turn this off. I've read around a little bit, and I've seen some indication that perhaps this is an indication that the motherboard needs to be recapped. I do have the caps for that. That was sort of part of what I was gonna plan to do as part of this restoration. So before I get onto that, this is a little test that I did. So I've got one of my Apple II discs here, which, I mean, I think of it as an Apple II disc, but it's really just the Apple 3.5-inch drive, which I understand they really it became a standard for both of the platforms, the Mac and the. So I'm going to connect this up, and I'm just going to disconnect this drive for now so that we don't have to listen to that. Okay, so there we go. Drive is connected, and let's just boot this up and see what happens now. So that drive obviously is not trying to eject over and over again. Let me adjust it a little bit so you can see it. Get this out of the way. Okay, so we get back to the same point. It's asking for a disk. All right, happy Mac. So that's an interesting test you can do, I guess, with your Mac. If you have an internal drive that isn't working, or if you're missing the internal drive completely, and you happen to have an Apple 3.5 800K drive, you can do something like this. Or, you know, obviously with this Mac in particular, with this model, they added an external SCSI connector, so clearly you could boot from a external SCSI if you had one of those as well. And yeah, there you go. We're booted up into the Mac desktop. So that's pretty cool. Okay, so my next course of action then is going to be to start with recapping just the motherboard, because it seems like the analog board is working fine. I do plan to recap that at some point. I have all the caps for it. I'm ready to go. It's just, it is quite a task. So, i.e. there are a lot of caps to be replaced there. Whereas the motherboard, there are very few. So I'm going to recap the motherboard. I'll bring you back, hook up one of the internal drives, and see if we can get it to boot. All right, we've got the Mac Plus motherboard here on the bench. I've removed the RAM, and this did have the stock 1 meg of RAM in it. I'm assuming it had never been out of those sockets since 1986 or whenever this was put together. Took those out, set them aside. Was being very, very careful not to break any of the clips on these plastic, mounting brackets. But yeah, the board looks beautiful. I mean, it's just like absolutely. It's a little, maybe a tiny bit dusty in some places, but otherwise just perfect. And again, same on the back. I don't see any, no rework or anything. It's just like a beautiful, beautiful board. So I've gone ahead and I've marked out the capacitors that I will need to remove for recapping. These particular ones, because of the way this board was constructed, the legs are all fairly bent over. So I'm going to start by just using the soldering iron, getting the solder to flow hopefully, and then straightening those legs. And then we'll move on to the actual sucking the solder out with the solder pump and pulling those caps off. So here we go. Okay, all the capacitors are out. It was actually a little bit more difficult than I thought it was going to be, but I mean, they basically came out. I'm going to go ahead and test them now. So I've got the multimeter set up. I've got it set up for capacitance. Okay, let's go ahead and test some of these. See what we get. I'm really hoping that at least one of these is out of spec. 35 microfarad. It's supposed to be a 34, so that seems nice and close. Okay, almost 1,000 nanofarad. So what should this one be? Yeah, 1 microfarad. So, okay. I would call that good. I do have an ESR meter somewhere, but it's kind of hokey. Okay, I believe this is supposed to be another 34 microfarad cap. And it is. These are Nichicons, by the way, the originals, of course. And the replacements that I have are also Nichicons. So that's nice. I think I got my replacement set as a kit from Console 5, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, another 34 microfarad. And let's see here. Okay, a little bit higher. I think this is also another 33 microfarad. 37, doesn't seem that far out of spec though. I don't know for sure if that is fine, but I suspect it is. Okay, and this one is more like the others, those 35. So none of those seem to be bad, at least as far as my knowledge goes. That is a little bit of a disappointment. I'm going to go ahead and get the replacement Nichicons soldered in there, and then we'll regroup from there and give it a test. All right, we've got the Mac set back up here. This is after the recapping. I've recapped the motherboard, but not the analog board yet. And I've reattached one of the drives that I think is good. Now, I don't expect this to have changed any of the behavior that we were seeing before, just because those capacitors, after I took them out, they tested relatively fine. So, but anyway, let's power this up and see what happens. Okay, so just like before, we get the bong. Macintosh itself is happy. The drive is very unhappy. Okay, so that didn't change anything. Let's move on now to recapping the analog board, and we'll see where that gets us. Okay, this is the portion of the video where I should probably apologize to any people who are savvy about these old Macs, and specifically about the drives, and have suffered through the me trying to figure out what was going on when the actual solution was fairly obvious. So I'll try to illustrate it here. This is the original drive that came out of this Macintosh. As you can see, this is one of my new drives. Very, very similar looking, very correct for coming in a Macintosh. On this drive, you notice the cable has the usual red stripe for pin 0 or pin 1, however you're numbering it. And this cable here does not. And in fact, if it's probably not showing up very well on camera, but instead of the red stripe, there's actually a yellow stripe. And that was my issue. So the fact that the disk drives were ejecting over and over again is because at some point Apple decided not to carry through a couple of pins that on these new drives, if you use this old cable with all the pins connected, I believe there's 2 that are don't need to be connected, it will either ground or cause a signal to get to this drive where it just thinks it needs to eject over and over and over again, and it's purely because of the cable. Once I discovered that, I was able to source a new cable and get the one of these new drives hooked up. So here it is. I've got it all hooked back up inside the Mac. Let me throw you on the tripod and we'll try booting the Mac now. All right, We've got the correct drive cable plugged in. The drive is hooked up. It's just set in there for now. And I have a Macintosh boot disk in there. Let's just give it a shot. Okay. Got the bong warming up. And fingers crossed. There we go. Happy Mac. And we're booting into Mac OS. So that's pretty cool. I basically after I recapped the motherboard on this, the only thing I had left that I knew to do was to recap the analog board, which I had very little hope that would actually fix the problem with the disk drive. So I started just looking around. I ended up watching the 8-Bit Guy's video about Macintosh Pluses and why you should never try to restore one. But he mentioned in that the dead Mac scrolls. And so I did go and find the dead Mac scrolls, and lo and behold, of course, this was one of the issues that was in it. So yeah, here we are. Let's see if we can think of a Mac noob. But yeah, very, very happy with how this one has turned out. I'm just going to put it back together. I'm not going to recap the analog board for now. Have the caps. Nothing on there looks bad. Nothing's bulging. Nothing's leaking. So for now, I think I'm going to call this a success. Let me just try. I'll just try. And the disk ejects. All right, so yeah, I will put this all back together, and then I'll bring you back for a recap. Well, in keeping with my long-standing tradition of saying one thing and then doing something else, hopefully not too much, I decided to go ahead and recap the analog board. So here it is out, and the reason that I decided to bite the bullet is I was putting it back together, and this kept staring me in the face, and I'm like, I don't want that RIFA in there. So I went ahead and replaced the RIFA with a modern replacement here, included within the Console 5 recapping kit. And after I did that, I looked like really closely at all these other caps, trying to give myself any reason to kind of wimp out and not recap the whole thing. And this one here, probably not very visible, but it has just the slightest of bulges to it. So what the heck? I decided I'm going to go ahead and recap the whole thing. So let me get that done, and then I'll bring you back and we'll put the thing back together finally and have some final thoughts. All right, I've got the analog board, as you can see, completely recapped. That went fairly well. These single-sided boards are often really nice to desolder, just because you don't have to worry about, solder is often difficult to remove when it goes through the through holes and etc. Let's see, this is a 8384 branded analog board, if that matters to anybody. Yeah, so let's get the machine put back together. Okay, moment of truth. I have legitimately not powered this on yet, so here we go. First power up after the recap. Fingers crossed. All right, well, that sounds good. Getting video. And it's booting right up. Okay, so that was that turned out to be a much longer journey than I had anticipated. I did put new RAM in this machine as well, off camera. I put in 4 1 meg sticks. However, I'm only getting 2 megs of apparent free RAM, so not sure yet what is up with that. But for now, I'm going to call this a very big win, because this machine was actually pretty easy to work on, but mainly because I think I lucked out. Like the monitor clearly works really nicely. The disk drive, of course, was not working. I had to replace that and had to muddle through figuring out the various interesting things about Macintosh disk drives that I did not know about. Yeah, we're gonna say this was a very successful and fun repair. I mean, you know, they're always fun when they work, right? So there you go. Yeah, sorry that this took so long for me to put together. I've had a lot of interesting life challenges over the last few months, as well as, again, just kind of not really knowing very much about these Macintoshes. So yeah, hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully the journey was interesting to you, and you weren't too frustrated if you're a Mac aficionado. And yeah, I will see you on the next one. I have several more interesting projects planned or in progress that hopefully I can get to much more rapidly than I got to this one. I'm hoping to get back to at least one video a week here pretty soon. So again, thank you, and I will see you later.